My name is Carter Miles, and if you'd seen me 15 years ago, you wouldn't have believed I'd end up here, living in a glass mansion on a cliffside, watching the sun melt into the Pacific while sipping coffee that costs more than what I once earned in a day. But none of this was handed to me. I wasn't born into legacy or privilege. No silver spoon. No trust fund. Just a rusted-out Honda Civic, a backpack full of dreams, and a mother who taught me how to survive with integrity, even when the world was cruel. She died when I was 17. Cancer. It came fast and cruel, robbing her of her energy and me of my last remaining family. I held her hand through every chemo session, every sleepless night, and when she finally closed her eyes for the last time, I wasn't ready. Her last words to me were, "Carter, promise me you'll do something big. Not just for yourself, but for someone who can't." I promised. I just didn't know how. 2 weeks later, I was evicted. There was no one to fight for me, no lawyer to call. Just a pink notice on the front door and the sinking realization that I had nowhere to go. I slept in the Civic for nearly 6 months, parking near gyms so I could sneak in showers. I worked at a greasy diner during the day, flipped burgers, cleaned toilets, and washed dishes at night. I wasn't just broke. I was invisible. People saw through me. Or past me. No one ever asked my name. No one noticed the teenager with the cracked phone and second-hand shoes trying to keep his world from falling apart. But there was a fire in me. I was tired of being helpless. Tired of watching other people's lives move forward while mine felt stuck in quicksand. I started saving every tip, even coins. I'd skip meals just to afford a cheap community college textbook. I borrowed Wi-Fi from the library to learn basic coding. HTML, CSS, copywriting. I devoured everything like my life depended on it because it did. I remember the first time I made $100 online. I'd written product descriptions for a small e-commerce store overseas. I stayed up all night crying, not because it was a lot of money, but because it was proof. Proof that I didn't have to live and die in that car. Proof that I could create something from nothing. Over the next 2 years, I built a small but consistent freelance business. Nothing fancy. Just branding, web design, and marketing consulting for mom-and-pop shops that couldn't afford big agencies. I did it all from borrowed laptops and coffee shops with broken chairs. But each month I earned more than the last. When I finally signed a lease on a 500-square-foot studio apartment, I slept on the floor for 3 months because I couldn't afford a bed. But I didn't care. I'd made it inside. No more waking up to frost on my windshield. No more hiding from cops who banged on the window at night. By 22, I had saved enough to launch my first startup. I called it PulseReach, a boutique digital marketing firm built for small businesses trying to compete with giants. I focused on emotional storytelling. Brands didn't need to shout louder. They needed to speak to people's hearts. That was my angle. At first, it was just me, working 18-hour days, eating ramen, cold emailing prospects, and designing logos at 2 a.m.
But slowly momentum came.
A bakery in Seattle. A yoga studio in Austin. A mechanic shop in Detroit. They saw what I offered, heart, hustle, and honesty, and they signed up. Year 2, I hired my first employee. By year 3, I had 15. We weren't a massive firm, but we had soul. Clients trusted us. They referred friends. Our monthly revenue climbed into 6 figures. I moved us into a real office and bought desks that didn't wobble. Then came the acquisition offer. That night, I couldn't sleep. Elsie and her son haunted my thoughts. Her strength. Her dignity. The fierce way she protected her child, even in the face of utter desperation. I'd met countless CEOs, sat across from venture capitalists with $1,000 suits and empty eyes, but she had something they didn't. Purpose.
And it shook me.
I kept replaying our conversation, especially the way she smiled when her little boy, Jacob, she'd said, took 3 tiny steps before tumbling into her arms. That joy, that light in the middle of a storm, pierced through something in me I didn't even know was frozen. The next morning, I canceled all my meetings. I told my assistant to reschedule the council hearing. The tech deal could wait. Something bigger had walked into my life, something far more urgent than land permits or digital analytics. I went back to that street corner with 2 umbrellas, a warm meal, and a single question echoing in my heart. What if that had been my mother and me? But Elsie wasn't there. Not the next day, either. It took 3 days of searching, driving block by block through downtown alleys, shelters, and underpasses before I finally spotted her sitting beneath an overhang near the old train station, rocking Jacob in her arms, singing softly. When she saw me, she looked surprised, cautious. I knelt beside her, rain dripping off my coat. "I came back for you," I said simply. "I meant it when I said your son was lucky." She looked down, gently adjusting Jacob's tiny hoodie. "Why?" she asked, voice hoarse. "I'm just some homeless girl with no high school diploma and a baby." I shook my head.
No.
"You're a fighter, a protector, and I want to help." She didn't believe me at first. Honestly, I wouldn't have either. I told her I'd arrange temporary housing, a clean, safe place.
Food.
Clothing. A few nights to breathe. She hesitated, said she didn't want handouts. So I offered it differently. "Not a handout," I said. "A head start, like the one I wished someone gave me." That broke through. We drove to a transitional family apartment I sponsored through Elevation Bridge. It was modest, 2 rooms, clean linens, running water. A crib in the corner. Jacob immediately waddled toward it, touching the mobile above with wonder. Elsie cried quietly in the bathroom. The following week was a whirlwind. I assigned a case manager to support her, got her enrolled in GED classes, set up a savings account with a first deposit made anonymously. She didn't want charity, so I offered opportunity. I also gave her a job, part-time admin work at Elevation Bridge. Flexible hours, training provided. She was hesitant, nervous. "I've never used a computer," she confessed. "Neither had I replied, until someone showed me where to start." We began with basics, typing, email, spreadsheets. She picked it up fast, real fast. Within a month, she was handling intake forms, organizing digital files, and communicating with partner shelters better than half my team. But it wasn't just her work ethic that impressed me, it was her empathy. Every time a scared, displaced teen or single mother walked through our door, Elsie was the first to greet them. Her story gave them hope. Her presence gave them courage. Slowly, she became more than an employee. She became our heart. And I was changing too. I'd spent years building success, brick by brick. But in helping Elsie, I discovered a deeper kind of wealth, the kind that couldn't be measured in numbers or assets. One night, I stayed late at the office, buried in paperwork. Elsie was still there, softly humming as Jacob played beside her desk. I watched her from the hallway, a strange warmth filling my chest. She looked up and smiled. "You're always the last one to leave." I chuckled. "So are you. Guess we're both stubborn." That made me laugh, and then silence. Comfortable, meaningful silence. "Why me, Carter?" she asked quietly. "Out of everyone on that street, why did you stop for me?" I sat down beside her, serious now. "Because when I saw you with Jacob, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. A mother with nothing but love, giving her everything anyway. It reminded me of my mom. And I realized I couldn't drive away and forget. Not this time." Her eyes welled up. She nodded slowly. "Thank you for not forgetting." Months passed, and Elsie bloomed. She got her GED, started a part-time online course in nonprofit management. She began leading weekly support groups for young mothers, helping them find strength through shared stories. Jacob started daycare. He loved blocks and blue crayons, called me Katu, and insisted I read him bedtime stories on Friday afternoons when Elsie stayed late. Somewhere along the line, without realizing it, we became a little makeshift family. I found myself showing up not out of obligation, but anticipation. I wanted to see them, to be near them. It wasn't romantic, at least not at first. It was deeper than that. Healing. Redemptive. Then came the night that changed everything. Elsie and I were hosting a holiday dinner for Elevation Bridge families. Lights strung across the ceiling, volunteers serving warm food, laughter echoing off the walls. Jacob was sitting on my lap, sticky from candy canes, when one of the teenagers asked, "Mr. Carter, were you ever homeless too?" The room fell quiet. I nodded.
Yeah.
For a long time. Elsie looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "That's why I built this place," I continued. "Because back then, I had no one, no direction, and I swore that if I ever got out, I'd build something for the ones who were still stuck." The girl smiled. "You kept your promise." Those words hit like a thunderclap. I had. After all these years, I'd finally fulfilled what I told my mother on her deathbed. But what surprised me most was that I didn't feel alone anymore. That night, after everyone left and the lights dimmed, I walked Elsie to her car. "I need to tell you something," I said, heart thumping. She looked at me. "I think I already know." "Do you?" "I think I've known for a while." "I'm scared," I admitted. "Not of how I feel, but of ruining what we've built." She stepped closer, resting a hand on my chest. "Carter, you saved us.
But more than that, you saw us.
And I haven't felt seen in a long, long time." I leaned in. She didn't pull away. And in that quiet parking lot, under soft snow and flickering lights, I kissed the woman who reminded me of everything good I still had inside me. From that moment on, we weren't just partners in mission. We were partners in life. But love didn't mean life got easier. One of our elevation bridge centers was burned down in an act of hate. We lost half our funding during a budget cut year. Elsie received threats from someone connected to her past, someone who didn't like seeing her rise. But through it all, we stood firm. Side by side. We rebuilt. We restructured. We grew. Elsie became co-director. She hired staff, ran programs, helped design a digital mentorship network that reached 22,000 users in 1 year. She was no longer the scared girl under the train station awning. She was a leader, a mother, and a living reminder that broken tea. I never imagined rebuilding my heart would teach me how to rebuild the world. After Elsie said yes, everything changed, yet nothing changed. We were already a family in all the ways that mattered. But now, with a ring, even if it was plastic and glowed in the dark, it felt like we were stepping into something sacred.
Real. Ours.
We didn't announce it with fanfare. No tabloids, no gala. Just us, Jacob, and the quiet understanding that love had found us when we least expected it. Elsie wore that plastic ring for months. Said it reminded her that life's most valuable treasures often come from the unlikeliest places. Eventually, I gave her another, vintage rose gold, with a diamond small enough not to catch headlines, but big enough to remind her she was loved beyond reason. But while our home life grew richer, our mission deepened too. Elsie's story began to spread. She was invited to speak at a national housing summit, then to Congress, then to international panels discussing poverty, resilience, and maternal advocacy. She never once read off a script. She didn't have to. Her voice carried truth, and truth doesn't need permission to shine. Meanwhile, I started to shift my investments. I divested from anything that didn't align with our new purpose. Tech was still in my blood, but I wasn't interested in gadgets anymore. I wanted solutions. Real ones. Tools that could empower the voiceless. We created apps for homeless access to shelters, real-time food availability, mental health check-ins. We built a secure platform for domestic abuse survivors to seek help without leaving a digital footprint. Money poured in from investors hungry to support something that actually made a difference. What started as Elevation Bridge became Elevation Global. By the third year, we had centers in 17 countries, employing thousands, many of them formerly homeless, trafficked, or incarcerated women. Elsie ran the entire training division. She did it while raising Jacob, while battling her own lingering trauma, and while refusing to let anyone forget where she came from. "I'm not a statistic," she told the audience at a global summit in Brazil. "I'm a story. And every one of you has one worth telling." That line went viral. But it wasn't until a letter arrived at our office, scrawled in pencil from a girl in a group home in Detroit, that we realized the scale of what we were doing. She wrote, I heard Elsie speak. I was gonna give up. But now I think I'll stay. Maybe one day I'll be someone's Elsie too. Elsie read that letter over and over again. Then she turned to me, tears in her eyes. We're not just changing lives, Carter. We're saving them. And that's when I knew we weren't chasing dreams anymore. We were building a legacy. But with legacy comes fire. And not everyone wants to see you rise from ashes. In our 4th year of marriage, the unthinkable happened. Jacob was 8, full of questions and energy. I had just landed back from a conference in South Africa. Elsie had stayed behind to manage the launch of a women's clinic in New York. Jacob was staying with his godmother when our driver took a wrong turn heading home. A truck, runaway brakes, no lights, slammed into the passenger side. I remember the sound more than the impact. Shattering metal, screaming tires, Jacob's scream over the phone before it cut out. I lost years in that second. I arrived at the hospital in record time. Jacob was conscious, but had fractured 2 ribs and a leg. The doctors said he was lucky, that if the driver had hit a second later, it would have been his side. Elsie didn't speak when she arrived. She just climbed into Jacob's bed and held him for hours. I stood beside them, my hands trembling like they hadn't in decades. The news ran with it, of course. Billionaire family escapes tragedy. But they didn't understand what really broke us. A week after the accident, we received a letter. No return address. Inside was a typed note. This is what happens when you give the forgotten a voice. Stay silent. Or next time, the kid won't be so lucky. It felt like the earth cracked under me. I wanted blood. I wanted revenge. But Elsie, she was stronger. She looked at me, eyes hollow but unshaken, and said, "We can't stop. Not now. Not when we're finally being heard." So we hired security, moved to a more secure location. But we didn't stop. We made our work louder, more fearless. Because fear only wins when good people go quiet. Jacob healed.
He walked again.
Played again. Laughed again. But I never forgot that letter. And strangely, it became a kind of fuel. I poured my energy into launching our biggest project yet, the ARC Initiative, a full-scale rehabilitation city built on a reclaimed industrial zone. Sustainable housing, education, therapy, vocational training. Not a shelter, a rebirth. It took $210 million and 4 years of planning. But the day we cut the ribbon, with 187 families moving in, Jacob standing tall beside us, and Elsie wiping tears with one hand and waving with the other, I knew I'd spent my fortune exactly right. That night, I wrote something in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. Maybe wealth isn't what you build, but what you rebuild. That thought stayed with me when, months later, Elsie stood in front of our board of directors and proposed the unthinkable, giving up her official salary and donating it to create emergency safe houses for trafficked mothers. "Money gave me a roof," she said, "but dignity gave me life. Let me pass it on." The board was stunned. I wasn't. That was Elsie. Always giving more than she received. Always building ladders for others to climb. And the world noticed. She received the International Peace Medal, was named Humanitarian of the Decade, met with presidents and kings. Yet she never changed. She still made pancakes every Saturday. Still tucked Jacob in with lullabies from the street. Still reminded me to breathe when I got too caught up chasing impact instead of presence. But then came another storm. I was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but aggressive. My energy dipped. My body ached. The empire we'd built suddenly felt heavier than I could carry alone. I remember the night I told Elsie. We were on the balcony, stars above us, the soft hum of the city below. She didn't cry. She just held my hand and said, "Then I'll carry you for a while. You carried us. Let me return the grace." And she did. She ran Elevation Global while I rested. She parented. She expanded the ARC initiative to 3 new countries. She didn't just take the torch, she lit the entire sky with it. Watching her rise, I realized something I never saw coming. She was no longer the girl I helped. She was the woman I aspired to be. And in that realization, I found peace. One day, while Jacob, now 15, was practicing a speech for his school's leadership summit, I watched him from the couch, my body tired but my soul full. He looked up at me and said, "Dad, do you think I'll ever be as brave as Mom?" I smiled. "You already are, son. You come from fire." "I used to live in one of your arcs," she said, voice trembling. "My mom cleaned offices at night, so I could study. She said you and your wife believed in people like us. That's why I'm graduating today." I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. All I could manage was, "Your mom was right. We still do." That night, I returned home to Elsie and told her the story. She didn't say anything. She just curled up beside me and let the moment wrap around us like a warm blanket. We were getting older. Her hair had more silver than before. My hands shook more often. But in those little frailties, I found something sacred, proof that we had lived deeply, fiercely, without regret. Then came the letter. It arrived with no fanfare, just tucked among the bills and catalogs on a Tuesday morning. The handwriting stopped me cold. I recognized it instantly. I sat down, heart racing, and opened it slowly. "Dear Carter,
You don't know me.
not really, but I know you. Years ago, I watched you sit in a park with a woman and her son. You bought them shoes. You sat in the dirt beside them. You saw them. That woman was my sister. You changed her life. She passed away last winter. Cancer. Quick and cruel. But she died with dignity, in a house she owned, with food in the fridge and a son who never went hungry. She told me before she went that her life started again the day you looked at her like she mattered. I was angry for a long time. At the world. At myself. At people like you. I thought you all looked down on us. But then I watched you build homes. Fund clinics. Sit in courtrooms fighting for the forgotten. And I realized you weren't a savior. You were just a man trying to be decent. So, I wanted to say thank you. Not just for what you did for her, but for what you taught me. We all get second chances. Some of us just need someone to hold the door open. I work at a shelter now. Same one she once slept in. Only now I run it. And every time I see a mother holding her child, trying to believe in something again, I think of her. And I think of you. With gratitude, Marla ***. I cried for a long time after that. Not the sharp kind of crying. The soft kind. The kind that humbles you. That night, I asked Elsie to join me in the garden. It was chilly, but she brought a blanket and some tea. I read the letter aloud. She was quiet when I finished. Then she reached out, touched my face, and said, "That's why we're here, Carter. That's why we woke up every morning when we didn't feel like it.
This.
Right here." She placed the letter inside a wooden box filled with the few things we considered sacred. Jacob's first drawing, her shelter ID tag, my dad's old watch, and now this letter. Then, after a pause, she looked at me with a soft grin. "You know what we should do next?"
What?
"Build a school." I laughed. "Another one?" "No," she said, her eyes glowing. "A real one. For girls like I was. A school that doesn't just teach math and science, but how to dream, how to lead, how to heal." And just like that, we were building again. Because builders never stop. It took 2 years. We named it the Lucille Academy, after Elsie's mother. It opened with 120 girls from across the country. The classrooms were painted with murals of women who changed history. The motto above the entrance read, "Your voice is not too small." And when Elsie stood on the opening day, in front of all those young faces, she didn't give a grand speech. She just said, "I used to sleep on cement. Now I teach on stages. So don't let anyone tell you where your story has to end." They erupted in cheers. I just sat in the back row, holding Jacob's hand, watching the woman who had turned my life inside out teach another generation how to walk through fire. That night, as we sat under the stars, Elsie curled up beside me and whispered, "Do you ever think about that day in the park?" "Every day," I said. "Me too," she smiled. "You didn't save me, Carter.
You just saw me.
And that changed everything. No, I replied. You saved me. She laughed. Well, then I guess we're even. We fell asleep outside, wrapped in one blanket, the cool night air around us, the sound of distant wind chimes from the porch, and the steady rhythm of two hearts that had found their way home. Epilogue. Years later, Jacob took over Elevation Global. He married a brilliant young architect he met in Nairobi while building a center for refugee youth. They had twins, two girls with fire in their eyes and compassion in their bones. Elsie and I moved slower. Our days were filled with reading, writing letters to graduates from Lucille Academy, and tending to a garden that now grew more memories than vegetables. Sometimes, strangers would visit our home. Young women, now doctors or teachers, who had once been homeless or scared or forgotten. They would sit at our table and tell their stories. And every time, without fail, one of them would say, I didn't think I mattered until I saw what you built. And I started to believe maybe I could build something too. And I would just smile, because that was the point. Legacy isn't about fortune. It's about what you leave behind in the hearts of those who thought they were invisible until someone knelt down in the dirt beside them and said, I see you.